Hey everyone, it's Ellie from the Maxon training team. And in this two-part tutorial, I'm going to take you through how to create this Nike swoosh animation using only Cinema 4D Lite and After Effects. In part 2 of this Nike swoosh tutorial, I'm going to take you through how to set up some lighting and texturing, and finally bringing our project back into After Effects to render it out. So in part 1, we created our 3D geometry for our Nike swoosh logo, and we also created this shoelace, and we actually set up some animation as well. So this is where we are currently at. And yeah, we can dive in straight away and set up some lighting. So first things first, I'm actually just going to hit render so we have a bit of a starting point. And so this is going to be our before, and then we're going to look at our after. So how do we set up lighting inside of Cinema 4D Lite? Well, this icon here, this little menu here, is where we can find all of our different lights. And the first thing we're going to do is just grab this top one, which is just a standard Omni light. And what we can do is we can actually use it to create some really nice ambient lighting. So this is going to create and cast light all over our shot. And all we need to do is come into ambient lighting and check that. And now we can see we're lighting our scene. So if I hit render, let's just take a look. So it's not really looking that great. Everything is really flat and almost just looks like 2D luminance. Well, if we couple this with, inside of our render settings, ambient occlusion. So this is a bit of like a fake global illumination effect, and what it's going to do is it's going to bring out and cast some shadows and create some darker areas, and it's going to bring back a lot of that 3D-ness. So if I just hit my render again, now we can see that we're getting some of those shaded and shadow areas back. Okay, so I'm actually going to do, let's just call this our ambient light, so we know which is which. And I'm actually just going to drop my intensity just slightly, and I'm going to create a bit of a blue, just a slightly blue light. There we go. Our next light is going to be an infinite light. So I'm just going to rotate this round, and we can use this to cast some more light in our scene. So maybe we just sort of do something a bit like this, and then we can render again. So this is already starting to look really nice. So one thing we can actually do is we can use what's called our interactive render region. If we don't want to have to keep rendering, we can use this, and we have a slider here, which is like a quality slider. So I pull this up, we can see as we make changes and as we make updates to our scene, we can see exactly what this is doing. So maybe we go about 75% on that light. So this was our infinite light. And I'm also going to grab another light, and this time we're going to grab an area light. And I'm going to use this to cast a rim light, which is going to cast a nice sort of like greeny glow on here and just on these edges as well. And so let me actually just get rid of my interactive render region for now. And in my light, let's just rotate this so it's pointing this way. And come back into my 4 views, and we can just reposition it up here. And then in my light, in my details area, I can actually make it bigger or smaller on the y-axis, or bigger or smaller on the x-axis. And let's go for the x-axis. And then we can pull this up. We can just rotate it down a little bit. And then let's have it casting just slightly from behind. And let's just make this our neon green. Maybe not as bright and not as intense. So now if I hit that render button, we can see we're getting just like a nice sort of green tint on here. And this is going to look great, especially when we have that lime green plastic that we're going to put on here. So I'm relatively happy with how this is looking. I might even increase my infinite light just a touch more. And then we're going to come into here and see what this looks like. Okay, so we've gone from here to here. And in a matter of just a couple of lights, we've actually created a really, really nice look. And it's not taken us very long. So from here, let's create some materials. We're going to focus on 3 main materials. The first is going to be our studio backdrop. The second is going to be our lime green plastic, which we're going to use for our Nike swoosh logo and the ends of our shoelace. And then we're also going to create a really cool looking fabric shoelace material as well. So how do we create our materials inside of C4D? Well, we need to open our material manager. So this little icon here is going to open our material manager. And if we just double click, we create a standard material. And this is what we're going to be doing. We're creating standard materials here. And the reason for that is because they render really, really fast and they're really quick and easy to create. So this is going to be our studio. And we're going to keep this simple. So we're going to make this just an off-white and we're going to just remove our reflectance layer. So I just hit remove and we're going to use this on our backdrop. So we can drag it on to the object in our scene or we can drag it onto the object in our objects manager. So this is actually going to help with our lighting as well because what this is going to do is the lights are going to hit this white backdrop studio and it's going to bounce off and it's going to cast a nice brighter light for us, which is great. So that's our first material done. So 1 down, 2 to go. Again, we're going to double click and this is going to be our green plastic. This is going to be like our Nike logo. So if I just drop that on the individual elements of my logo here. And so you could have a different color for each of these. I'm just going to use the same one just to make it nice and easy. So let's double click my green plastic and this is going to open my material editor. So it's the same settings or it's some of the same settings that you also get access to down here. You might prefer this way of working. So I thought I'd show this as well. So let's create our green plastic. So let's create I quite like a lime green. So maybe a bit more yellow in there. Something a bit like this, maybe. Cool, maybe like that. Okay, so that's looking cool. Now what I want to do, I want it to be a green plastic. And so in my reflectance layer, I'm going to remove my default specular because this is a bit of a fake reflection effect. If I remove that, I can add my own reflectance layer. If I add a Beckman, it's going to basically turn this into a chrome material, but we don't want that. We still want to be able to see our green color. So how do we get a glossy reflection whilst also keeping our lime green color? Well, what we need to do is inside of my layer 1, so this was my Beckman that I just created, come down to layer Fresnel. And in this drop down, instead of it being off, we want it to be a dielectric. And this is because plastic is a dielectric material. And then nice and simply, we get a whole bunch of presets based on the material we're creating. A good one for plastic is PET or plexiglass. So either of those will do. And then we can control our roughness with this roughness value inside of here. So we can create a rough material or we can create a glossy material. And that's all we're going to do. And that is our lime green plastic material. So if I just render this, we can see what we have at the moment. Cool, so it's looking good. Now what we can do, we can focus on these areas and this shoelace material. I may even increase some more of the blue dependent on, On that, I'm not too sure. And maybe with the green, we want to make it a little bit of a brighter green. Something a bit like that, perhaps. So let's come into my ambient light and let's just make this slightly bluer. There we go. Let's see what this looks like. Yep. Yeah, that's looking a lot nicer now. Okay, so let's create this shoelace material. So let's double click for the final time and type in shoelace. So let's throw this onto our shoelace and now let's double click and open up our material editor. Back inside my asset browser, so this is where we used our studio backdrop, we can grab a fabric material. And if we come down here, we actually have access to texture maps. And so we have this fabric texture map here, and we can use this inside of this material. So if I drag and drop this fabric onto this texture area here, it's going to now be projecting onto my shoelace. It's looking a little bit strange though. And the reason for that is because of the way that it's projecting or being mapped onto the surface of our geometry. So what we need to do, we need to go into our material tag settings, and then we just need to control and adjust this length on our U and V. So this one here is our V. So if I just pull this all the way down to something like 3, we can see we're getting a much more accurate projection. And then with our length, we could even increase this to maybe something like 140. Basically, just decide what you think looks good by adjusting these values here. So I'm happy with this, so this is how I'm going to leave it for now. And don't worry about these end bits, these end areas. We're going to fix those in just a sec. So we're not quite done because I do actually want to do a couple of things before I'm finished with this material. And the first one is I want to recolor this texture map. So I really like this pattern, but I'm not too keen on it just staying black and white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this little arrow here and I'm going to choose colorizer. And now when I click the thumbnail, we have a gradient here, and this is going to allow me to recolor this texture map and effectively recolor the pattern. So first things first, let's double click this knot and let's choose a sort of greeny color to match. And then this second dot is going to be my second color, which is going to be black. And I'm just going to pull in this black handle. What this is going to do is going to increase those areas. So if I just pull this all the way up, you can see what it's going to do. And so I quite like pulling this up quite a bit, and we have some thinner lines here, which is quite nice. Before we're finished, we can actually add some surface detail to the top of our material as well. And the way that we do that is inside the asset browser, we also have access to a bump map for this fabric. And so if I enable my bump channel, I can drag and drop that inside of here. And then I can use the strength slider to increase and decrease some surface detail on here. And what's great is it won't take too long to render because it's just a surface effect. It's just a rendering effect on the material. So there we go. So far, we have created our plastic, our backdrop, and this nice shoelace texture here. However, we've got some issues going on with our shoelace toggles, and we want these to be a green plastic. Well, I want them to be a green plastic. And so how exactly do I do that? Well, inside of the sweep, we have selections, and these are called polygon selections, and these relate to certain areas of our geometry. So our shell is this main area here. Our start and end caps are the very top and bottom face, And then our start and end bevel is this toggle that we set up in part 1. And they each come with their own individual code. And we can use these inside of the selection area in the material. So what I can do, I only want this material to be on the shell of my shoelace. So if I put the code S for shell, it's now only on this main area. And then if I add the green plastic and then pull it just before my shoelace, we now have our end toggles as well in that green plastic. And if I hit render, we can see this is what we have going on. And I'm happy with this. If we take a look at how it looked before and now after, we have very quickly turned it into a really nice looking shot. So if we get rid of our materials and press Command S, we're now ready to bring this back into After Effects and then make any adjustments, and then we're good to render it out. So back into After Effects. This is where the magic happens. So I've just saved my Cinema 4D file and I've opened up my After Effects project, my composition that we had at the very start of part 1. And what you'll notice is inside my project area, we have that same C4D file. So if I drag and drop this into here and press play, once it starts to load, we can see that we have our Cinema 4D scene and animation now inside of After Effects and playing relatively quickly. If I just pause this, what you will notice is we're not getting a really accurate render. We're not getting the same look as the one that we had inside of Cinema 4D, and there's a main reason for that. If I come over to my effect controls for my C4D file, this is coming in using something called Cineware. And so by default, our renderer is set to viewport draft. And this is great because this is the fastest way of linking between Cinema 4D and After Effects. So any changes I make in C4D, when I save it, it's going to update immediately in After Effects. And so it's not going to slow down my way of working. But if I'm ready to go, I'm ready to basically render or set up some color grading, then I'm going to want to change this to current. And it's going to have a little think about it. It's going to take a couple of seconds, but here we go. We can see we now have a really nice representation inside of here. So from here, once I'm happy with how everything's looking, I can now do any of the things that I would like to do inside of After Effects. So for me, I'm going to keep it nice and simple. I'm just going to add an adjustment layer, and then I'm going to do a little bit of color grading using Magic Bullet Looks. So if I just add that and then we can edit that. I've already been having a little look at some of these presets that I'm quite like, and I think I'm a fan of this one here. I do, however, want to decrease the strength, and we can see how this is looking, and then we can just accept that. And now this is exactly what it's doing. It's just adding some nice finishing touches to my project. And from here, we're pretty much good to go, and we're good to render our animation as we normally would inside of After Effects. So we can go to composition, add to media encoder queue, or add to render queue, however you're used to working, and then save your file and you're good to go. So here's our final render for the last time. I hope you've enjoyed this 2-part tutorial series. If you have, don't forget to like and subscribe.